The church hid the hidden gospels that reveal a different God. You have been deceived. What if the image of God you know was fabricated? What if everything you've learned in pulpits, in services, in Sunday sermons was carefully constructed to keep you away from the deepest truth that exists? Imagine if for centuries, texts that revealed not only a new understanding of the divine, but a completely different God from those presented by religious institutions were removed, erased, banned, and forbidden. Have you ever wondered why so many gospels were considered heretical? Why did the church single out some books and condemn others to eternal oblivion? Why do names like Thomas, Mary Magdalene, and Jude carry versions of Jesus' teachings that contradict what is in the current Bible? The answer is disturbing and transformative. For centuries, the hidden gospels were hidden from humanity. The ancient texts, suppressed by religious leaders and governments, reveal a God who is unmoved by wrath, punishment, or eternal punishment. On the contrary, they speak of an internal and accessible God alive within you, a God who invites you to awaken, not to blindly obey. These ancient manuscripts reveal spiritual truths that, if widely known, would forever change the way we view the world, our faith, and even ourselves. They question heaven and hell. They rewrite the mission of Judas. They elevate the figure of Mary Magdalene to something far greater than we've been told, and they show that the true kingdom of God is not out there, but within you. The question now is, why did you hide this from yourself? Was the truth silenced for fear of people freeing themselves from religious control? Did you discover that you no longer needed intermediaries, temples, or dogmas to access the divine? You would become free. This video will take you on a path few dare to follow. We'll delve into forgotten records between the lines of history, into texts that were called Apocryphal, Gnostic, and forbidden. But what you'll see here isn't heresy, it's revelation. And perhaps for the first time, you'll understand why your soul always felt like something was missing. If you feel there is a gap between what you were taught and what you truly feel about God, if your faith has already been shaken by the contradictions of religion, if you have thought that spirituality should be more than rituals and empty doctrines imposed on you, then this video is for you. Prepare yourself. What you hear may challenge everything you believe, but it may also set you free. Few people know this truth, and those who do may never see the world the same way again. Let's unpack, one by one, the 10 points that reveal the different God hidden in the hidden Gospels. And at the end of this journey, you can draw your own conclusions. But beware, the more you know, the less you can pretend you don't know. This is a revelation that cannot be erased. Are you ready for this? So take a deep breath and prepare for what's coming, because what we're about to reveal will shake your very core. Before we continue, I want to ask you something very important. If this beginning has already moved you, comment below. Do you already suspect that there are hidden truths in the Bible? Have you ever felt like the image of God you were taught doesn't make sense for how you feel spiritually? Your experience matters. Your comments aren't just a blast. They help build a community of people who are awakening, questioning, and seeking something beyond ready-made answers. When you comment, you participate. When you share your vision, you connect with others who are also seeking the truth behind the curtain of traditional religion. And now take this opportunity to leave your like on this video. It sounds simple, but this gesture has enormous power. Every like shows YouTube that this content is relevant, profound, and needs to reach more people. Perhaps someone experiencing a crisis of faith, being stifled by a distorted view of God, will watch this video for its own benefit. This makes all the difference. Plus, when you leave likes and comments, the algorithm understands that this isn't just another video, it's a message that needs to spread. And you're part of that. So comment now, like. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do so, because this journey is just beginning. We still have so much to reveal, and the next point may be what you've always sought, but never had the courage to confront, to dig deeper. And understand why these hidden gospels were hidden from you, we must go back in time. More precisely to the 4th century, a defining moment in human history, not just religious, but political, cultural, and spiritual. We're talking about the famous Council of Nicaea. held in 325 AD, under the command of the Roman Emperor Constantine. Yes, an emperor, not a prophet, not an apostle, but a political leader. And that already tells us a lot. It was at this council that it was decided, based on institutional and political interests, that the texts would be part of the Bible and that they would be discarded, silenced, labeled heretical. The formation of the biblical canon, that is, the official selection of sacred books, was not a purely spiritual process as many imagine. It was a human choice, charged with power, manipulation, and strategy. Have you ever stopped to think about it? That the Bible you read today is the result of a vote, of a dispute between men who wanted to maintain control over the spirituality of the masses. We're not speaking here to discredit the faith or disrespect the teachings of Jesus. Quite the contrary. We're trying to return to the most authentic roots of the message he left behind, which has been diluted, rewritten, and, in some cases, completely erased over the centuries. The so-called Apocryphal Gospels are ancient texts that did not enter the official canon of the Church, and when you hear the word apocryphal, you might think they're fake or worthless. But this is precisely the narrative they wanted you to believe, because apocryphal in origin simply means hidden, concealed, and the reason they were hidden has nothing to do with a lack of authenticity. It has to do with a threat to the system. These Gospels showed a more human, more conscious, more connected to the divine Jesus within, and that was too dangerous for those who wanted to maintain religion as a power structure. Texts like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Judas, yes, Judas, bring messages that surprise us because they show us another side of history, a side that empowers us, that invites us to seek God within ourselves, not in an institution or dogma. A side that breaks with the image of a vengeful, controlling, and distant God and presents a living, present, and accessible God who doesn't need temples to be found. Now think about me. If these texts carried such powerful messages, why have we never heard of them in the churches? Why does no one go up to the altar to speak about the Gospel of Mary or to read the teachings of the Gospel of Thomas, which, according to some scholars, was even written before the canonical Gospels? Why were these voices silenced? The answer lies in control. It lies in maintaining a structure that fuels fear, a system that, for centuries, has fed on guilt, condemnation, the idea that human beings are sinful by nature and need intermediaries to reach the divine. And the hidden Gospels break this logic. They restore power. They say you are light, that the kingdom is within you. That salvation lies not in obeying external rules, but in awakening the inner conscience. And if all this seems new, strange, or even dangerous, it's because you were taught not to question, but simply to accept what was given. But now is the time to open your eyes, to look beyond the surface, because spirituality isn't about blindly following. It's about discovering, feeling, and experiencing the divine in its essence. Imagine the impact it would have on human history if these truths had been taught in churches. Imagine if, as a child, you had learned that God is not on a throne judging your actions, but pulsating within your heart. That divinity is not external, but internal. That there is no separation between you and the sacred. This is what these hidden texts say, and perhaps that's why they were considered so dangerous. Ultimately, what's at stake here isn't just theology, it's consciousness. It's spiritual transformation. It's breaking a cycle of alienation that has been reproduced for centuries. It's not about destroying faith. It's about purifying it, to return it to its source, to reconnect with the true Christ, not the institutionalized and politicized Christ wrapped in doctrines, but the living Christ who spoke in parables, who taught profound truths, and who has become distorted over time. Maybe now you understand why this video exists, why this message must spread. And why are you here watching up to this point? Because something inside you always felt there was more, that the story was incomplete, that spirituality had to go beyond rules, commandments, fear of hell. You are here because something in your soul is ready to awaken. And this is no coincidence. Now, before we get into the first of the 10 points that reveal this different God hidden in the hidden Gospels, I want to ask you something simple, but very powerful. Tell me here in the comments if you've heard of the Apocryphal Gospels. Have you read anything about the Gospel of Mary or of Tomei? What has impressed you most so far in this periodical? Write in the comments, "I want to know this God who hid me," or if you prefer, "I'm ready for the truth." Whatever your experience so far, your participation is important. Let's continue together because the next point is even more profound. Now that you understand the historical and spiritual context behind the formation of the Bible as we know it, it's time to look more deeply into the lost Gospels. Powerful texts, revelations that have long been buried under the weight of religious censorship and institutional manipulation. These are documents that challenge the dominant narrative and were therefore erased from the collective memory. But they existed. They were read, taught, and practiced. They circulated among Jesus' earliest followers, and contrary to popular belief, these texts are not heresies written by opponents of the faith. On the contrary, they carry some of the most spiritual, profound, and liberating messages ever recorded. We're talking about works like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Judas, among others. Let's start with Thomas. This Gospel is perhaps one of the most striking. It's not a narrative about the life of Jesus, like the canonical Gospels. It's a collection of sayings, direct teachings, phrases attributed to Jesus himself, and surprisingly, not found in the traditional Gospels. Instead of miracles and chronological events, the Gospel of Thomas brings raw wisdom, pure spirituality, as if Jesus were speaking directly to the heart. And what most frightens traditional religious leaders is that in this text, Jesus affirms that the kingdom of God is within each of us, not in temples, not in doctrines, but within us. Do you notice the power of this statement? If the kingdom of God is within you, then you no longer need to be controlled. You no longer need to fear eternal punishment or depend on a religious leader to access the divine. This is a direct threat to any system based on hierarchy, fear, and blind obedience. And that is exactly why the Gospel of Thomas was rejected, hidden, and dangerously exchanged. Because it empowers the individual, it returns spirituality to its source, the human soul. Another extremely revealing text is the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. And here's an important break. Did you know that Mary Magdalene was portrayed for centuries as a prostitute? This image was widely promoted by the church, but today it's abundantly clear, including in historical documents, that she wasn't a fallen woman. She was one of Jesus' closest disciples. Some texts suggest that she understood the teachings even more deeply than Peter, and that Jesus confided in her revelations that she didn't share with anyone else. In the Gospel of Mary, we see a Christ who teaches the path of the Spirit above external laws, who speaks of inner freedom and hidden knowledge accessible only to those who seek the truth. And again, he was upset, because Mary, being a woman, could not be recognized as the bearer of divine wisdom in a patriarchal and oppressive structure. So what did you do? They erased it, they shut up, and they replaced her image with something that devalued her, nullified her, distorted her. And what about the Gospel of Judas? Yes, it exists, discovered in the mid-20th century after centuries hidden in caves and private collections. And the content? Explosive. It tells a completely different version of Judas's betrayal. According to this text, Judas did not betray Jesus. He obeyed a request from the Master himself. He would have understood something the other disciples did not. He would have been chosen to fulfill a difficult, painful, but necessary mission. That changes everything, doesn't it? Because in this scenario, Judas is no longer the villain of the story and becomes an agent of a greater revelation, a collaborator, a faithful disciple. Now imagine the impact of this on a faith based on the dichotomy between good and evil, between heaven and hell, between obedience and damnation. What interest would the church have in spreading a gospel that humanizes Judas and shows Jesus as someone who acts not literally, but symbolically, spiritually? These lost gospels share something in common, a completely different vision of the divine. A God who doesn't judge but reveals, one who doesn't separate but unites, one who doesn't require sacrifices but awareness. A Christ who didn't come to create a new religion, but to awaken souls. A teaching that speaks less of sin and more of potential, one that focuses less on hell and more on enlightenment, one that invites you to know the truth, not from the outside, but from within. and that's exactly why they were persecuted. These texts were considered threats. They were burned, buried, censored. Their readers were hunted down, their copies destroyed. There was persecution, executions, record manipulations. All to ensure that only one narrative would survive, the one useful to the empire, useful to the control structure, and not the liberation of souls. But even so, the truth survived. In fragments, in forgotten scrolls, in archaeological discoveries like those at Nag Hammadi, which revealed entire libraries hidden for centuries. And that's why you're here today, listening to it all. Because even when you try to turn off the light, it always finds a crack to shine through. Now you might be asking yourself, why didn't I know this before? The answer may surprise you, but it's simple. Because it doesn't matter to those who control the narrative that you have this knowledge. A people who think, question, search, and awaken are free people. And a free people do not submit, so more than ever it's time to make these questions resonate. It's time to share this knowledge, to bring forth what was silent. Because these Gospels aren't just ancient texts, they're invitations. Invitations to a new relationship with the sacred, a living, real, present spirituality. Something that touches you inside. Now tell me, have you heard of the Gospel of Thomas, or what Mary Magdalene really represented? Do you already suspect that Judas may have been harmed for centuries? Leave it here in the comments. Comments like this: the truth is coming out, or if you like, write, I am ready to find the true Christ. It helps me know you're with me on this journey, and more than that, it helps YouTube understand that this message needs to reach more people. Let's continue together, because the next point will further deepen everything we've just opened up. And what comes next may be the missing piece in your spiritual puzzle. And now that we've lifted the curtain on the forgotten Gospels, it's time to delve into what may be one of the most disturbing and liberating revelations of all: the vision of a God who lives within you. This isn't a new idea. On the contrary, it's one of the oldest, purest, and at the same time, most dangerous ideas for the traditional religious system. And it's embodied bluntly in the Gospel of Thomas. Perhaps the most striking phrase in this entire ancient text is the following: the kingdom is within you and without you. Read it again. Let this phrase resonate in your mind, penetrate your spirit, and challenge everything you've been taught. Because this seemingly simple statement shatters centuries of religious doctrines based on fear, guilt, and separation. Imagine that as a child you were taught to imagine God as a being, in the sky sitting on a throne watching and judging your every step. Most of us grew up believing that the divine was separate, on another plane, in another dimension, somewhere unreachable. To approach him, you would have to follow rules, make sacrifices, feel unworthy, constantly ask for forgiveness, and yet live in fear of not being accepted. But what if God isn't the one who taught you? What if true spirituality isn't about searching for heaven far away, but about awakening what has always been within you? What if the kingdom of God, which so many try to reach, has never been outside, but always inside? The Gospel of Thomas, suppressed and forgotten for centuries, presents this idea to us with disconcerting clarity. And most strikingly, he is not alone. But his power lies in how he invites us to look within, to recognize that the divine and the human are not opposites, but mirror images. This insight changes everything, because by understanding that God dwells within you, you understand that you are not a slave to the system, you are not essentially a sinner, you are not unworthy of existence, you are a temple, you are light, you are an extension of the source itself. This is one of the reasons this gospel was buried. It doesn't serve the logic of blind obedience, eternal punishment, or salvation conditional on behavior approved by religious leaders. It offers something far more dangerous to those who desire control. It offers freedom, but freedom requires responsibility. And that's why this idea is frightening, because if God is within me, I am called to be conscious, to awaken, to align myself with my essence. I can no longer externalize my faith, my guilt, or my salvation. The Gospel of Thomas teaches us that the spiritual path is internal, silent, and profound. That the true teacher is the one who teaches you how to find the teacher within you. And look how powerful it is. The text says that when you know yourself, then you will be known, and you will understand that you are a child of the living God, Now stop for a moment and think about it. Isn't that the exact opposite of what institutional religion has always preached? That you are a miserable sinner? That you only have value if you follow all the rules? That you are unworthy and that will only be saved if you pass muster? The external, punitive and inaccessible view of God serves as a structure, but the vision of the inner God, living in Tome, shatters this structure completely. It says, look within. You'll find what you're looking for. And this is so revolutionary that it's no surprise this gospel has been torn from official history. But even erased from the books, this truth continues to pulse in the souls of thousands of people who, like you, feel that something is wrong with what was taught. Something doesn't fit. Something is missing. And perhaps what's missing is just that. The invitation to return, to listen to what is silenced in the heart, to rediscover the divine, not in dogma, but in conscience. And isn't it curious that the closer you come to this idea, the more you feel peace, clarity, and meaning? This doesn't happen by chance. Truth has this ability. It ignites something within us. Even if the mind doubts, the heart recognizes, the spirit responds, and perhaps that's exactly what's happening to you now. Maybe you feel like everything makes more sense this way, that God isn't a cosmic tyrant, that it's not about fitting into the rules, but about reconnecting with your essence, that it's not about submission, but about awakening. And this awakening begins at the exact moment you realize you don't have to look away from what has always been within. But consider this. If this is the truth, and more people are finding out, what does that say about everything you've been taught up to this day? About the sermons you've heard? About the fears you've carried? About the times you thought you weren't good enough to be loved by God? I invite you to feel. It's not about arguing, but about recognizing. Something within you already know, something within you you always knew. And now, with this new vision of the divine, an internal God, present, silent, and at the same time enormous, you have the opportunity to encounter faith, a living, free, and intimate faith, a faith that doesn't distance you from yourself, but brings you closer to who you truly are. This is the power of the Gospel of Thomas. It doesn't invite you to follow a system. It invites you to remember. Remember that you have never been separate, that the kingdom is within you, that God has never been distant, that the sacred begins where the illusion of separation ends. And now that you've heard that, he asks, what does this phrase stir in you? Is it the kingdom within you? Have you ever felt this silent presence within you, even when everything outside seemed confusing? Tell me in the comments. Write it like this: the kingdom is within me. Or if you prefer something more direct, I recognize God within me. These words aren't just comments, they're declarations, and every time you write something like this, you activate this truth even more within yourself. Let's continue, because the next point will open a new layer of this mystery and show you how this inner connection can completely transform your spirituality. And now that we're beginning to awaken to the idea of a God who dwells within us, we must go even deeper. We need to confront another layer of concealment that for centuries shaped institutionalized spirituality, the silencing of the sacred feminine. This is a truth that hurts but liberates, and few texts reveal this as clearly as the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. Yes, her, Mary Magdalene, perhaps the most maligned and misunderstood female figure in the entire Christian tradition, presented as a prostitute, marginalized by dogma, and often treated as a mere prop in the story of Jesus. But the forgotten records, those that have not entered the canon, tell another story, a powerful, bold, and profoundly transformative one. The Gospel of Mary shows us a woman who not only accompanied Jesus, but also understood his words on a level few disciples could achieve. She wasn't just a follower, she was a confidant, a teacher, and a counselor. In excerpts from the text we see Peter, the same Peter who would be considered the rock of the church, questioning why Jesus entrusted Mary with the teachings he hadn't given them. And the implicit answer in the text is clear: because she understood the Spirit, while many were still stuck on the letter, and that bothered them. It bothered them deeply. Not only because a woman dared to occupy a space of spiritual leadership, but because her presence established an entire patriarchal structure that was beginning to form within the nascent church. The exclusion of Mary Magdalene from the canonical Gospels was not an innocent mistake. It was a political and strategic decision to erase the sacred feminine from spirituality. Because the sacred feminine threatens, it doesn't bend down to control. It doesn't fit into rigid, vertical systems. The feminine by nature is fluid, intuitive, and profound. It represents welcome inner wisdom and connection with the unhealthy. And for this very reason, it doesn't serve the logic of external power. It reveals inner power, the power of creation, healing, and truth that doesn't need to be proven, because it can be felt. The suppression of women's role in spirituality is one of the greatest tragedies in religious history. And we're not just talking about the absence of priestesses or pastors. We're talking about a structural disconnection from the essence of the divine feminine, present in so many ancestral and spiritual traditions around the world, but erased from the dominant narrative of institutional Christian faith. Mary Magdalene, in occult texts, doesn't just represent a woman with a voice. She represents the archetype of the awakened soul, the divine feminine consciousness that all of us, men and women, carry within us. And when this energy is denied, repressed, or ignored, what happens is a profound imbalance, both spiritual and social. And that's exactly what we've experienced for centuries. An imbalance that placed the masculine at the center of faith, not as a force of action and protection, but as domination, judgment, and control. A masculine God, distant, demanding, and legislating. A theology of men for men, based on rules and obedience. And with that, we've lost the sacred feminine. We've lost the presence of a welcoming, listening, understanding, nurturing spirit. Can you imagine what Christian spirituality would be like if Mary Magdalene had been recognized for who she truly was? If her teachings had been read from pulpits? If the idea that spiritual wisdom also resides in women was an essential part of the faith you were taught? The concealment of the female deity didn't just eliminate Mary's voice. She silenced entire generations of women who were taught to believe their place was as servants, not masters, that their spiritual value was secondary, that holiness was male. This created not only male-dominated churches, but also divided consciousness and mutilated spiritualities. But now, as part of this awakening you're experiencing with me, this energy begins to return. The truth begins to emerge from the shadows. Feminine wisdom, which has always been present between the lines of history, once again takes its place. And the most beautiful thing is that it doesn't rival man. It thrives to heal, to integrate, to restore. The Gospel of Mary is not just an old text. It is a flame, an ancestral memory, a reminder that the divine has multiple faces, multiple voices, and to deny the feminine is to deny half of God. So the question now is, how many other spiritual truths were erased simply by carrying the voice of a woman? How many teachings have you never heard because they were deemed inappropriate for not fitting into the male-dominated structure? What do you feel when you hear that Christ recognized Mary Magdalene as a spiritual companion? Do you trust her reserved teachings? Do you trust that she was the only one who deeply understood him? Even when the other disciples were still gripped by fear and doubt, these questions aren't easy, but they are necessary. Because to find a complete, living, and true spirituality, we need to restore the sacred feminine. We need to honor the energy that was silenced. And it begins when you listen, when you sit, when you allow this forgotten part of spirituality to live within you. Now, tell me, have you ever felt like something was missing from the way you were taught the faith? Have you noticed the void left by the absence of the female figure in sacred texts? Have you ever wondered what would have happened if Mary Magdalene had been recognized as the spiritual teacher she truly was? Write here in the comments, "I recognize the sacred feminine," or if you want, just say, "Mary, your voice is back." Every comment is a thread that weaves this truth back into the fabric of our collective consciousness. Every written word is a sign that we are awakening together. Stay with me, because what comes next will expand this revelation even further, showing you how in denying the feminine, we were also taught to fear hidden knowledge, but it never failed to call us back to ourselves. And as we bring forward these forgotten truths, revelations previously deemed unacceptable are taking shape. We've already talked about the lost Gospels, the God within, the feminine deity who has been erased from institutional faith. But now we come to one of the most controversial and delicate transformers of this journey, the role of Judas Iscariot. Yes, himself, the man who became known to all as the traitor, the figure who has carried the heaviest stigma in all of Christian history for centuries. Judas, the apostle who allegedly sold Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. The image of error, deception. But what if all of this is wrong? What if what Judas told you is just a version, a convenient version, to maintain the narrative of good and evil, hero and villain, of salvation by contrast? Now I invite you to put this idea aside for a moment, empty out for a moment what you were taught, breathe deeply, and listen with an open heart. There is an ancient, powerful, and for centuries forgotten document, the Gospel of Judas. It was discovered in the mid-20th century, but its existence was already mentioned by certain early Christian groups long before that. This text presents a radically different perspective on the events leading up to Jesus' crucifixion, a perspective that challenges all the structures of traditional faith, because, according to this gospel, Judas did not betray Jesus. He fulfilled a spiritual mission. Yes, Judas would, in fact, have been Jesus' closest disciple. The only one who fully understood the hidden teachings, the only one willing to bear the burden of a difficult, unpopular, and necessary action. In the text, it is Jesus himself who reveals the heavenly secrets to Judas and calls him to separate himself from the other disciples, to trust in his final destiny, to give him permission. This isn't betrayal. This is obedience to a divine command. This is collaboration. This is conscience. And if it's true, then our entire understanding of the crucifixion plan changes completely. Furthermore, it forces us to re-examine what it means to be a traitor and what it means to be faithful. Think with me. Traditional narrative needs a villain. It needs someone to represent darkness, to make Jesus' sacrifice seem even more redeeming. But what if, instead, it was all part of a plan orchestrated by Jesus and understood only by Judas? What if, at that moment, Jesus already knew that his surrender would be the necessary trigger to unleash the final message, to open the portal between humans and the divine, to awaken consciences? Can you feel the weight of it? If Judas was chosen, he did not corrupt. If he acted out of loyalty, not ambition. If he was an instrument of awakening, not perdition. So what did it teach us most? And here's the deepest point of this revelation. Judas's role represents the courage to do what no one wants to do, to bear the pain of judgment so that something greater might happen. And if he accepted this burden, knowing he would be hated, executed, erased from history, then his love for Jesus was greater than we imagine. Only someone who truly loves accepts being misunderstood for all eternity. Is it uncomfortable? Yes. But it's also liberating. Judas may not be the traitor. He may be the guardian of the mystery, the one who descended into darkness not to deny the light, but to reveal it. And that changes everything, because this understanding undoes the idea of the other as an enemy. It shows that spiritual awareness goes beyond appearances, that not everything that appears to be bad is evil, that sometimes the path of light passes through darkness, not to be lost in it, but to rescue us. And see how this also speaks to our own spiritual journey. How many times have you been judged for not following standards? How many times have you been misunderstood for seeking answers beyond traditional religion? How many times have you been called a traitor to the faith for daring to question, to think, to feel differently from what was imposed? Perhaps you're also on a mission of disruption, of confrontation. Truly, the Gospel of Judas was not included in the Bible because it overrides the logic of the guilt-based salvation system. It shows that Jesus' surrender was not a defeat, but a compromise. That the drama of the cross was not a tragedy, but a transition. This faith is not made up of heroes and villains, but of souls seeking to understand the mystery in depth. And this, for the religious system, is unbearable, because you can no longer control people with fear, with hell, with damnation. When you understand that even Judas may have been righteous, then you begin to see that the spiritual path is not about judging external actions, but about understanding what lies behind them. This teaches us that the spiritual journey is made up of paradoxes, of dualities which are, of light born from shadow, of redemption manifesting in pain. And this is where you begin to realize nothing was as you told yourself, but everything has a much deeper meaning. Now tell me honestly, have you ever had the feeling that Judas was used as a scapegoat in the story? Have you ever wondered why his figure was painted with such a negative charge, while the condemnation system continues to repeat much bigger mistakes? Write here in the comments, I want to know the truth about Judas. Or if you want to assert your position on this journey, the comments, not everything is as it seems. Your comments not only show me that you're here with me, but they help spread this message. And the more people touch this truth, the faster the light will fill the space that has been hidden for centuries. Stay with me, because the next point we're going to explore is even more provocative, and it will reveal what they did to the very image of God to make you believe in a punitive, distant, and controlling creator. And when you see it, it will all begin to make even more sense. After reviewing the figure of Judas and recognizing that perhaps history has been much more complex than we were taught, we come to a central point, perhaps the most profound, and at the same time, the most liberating of this journey here. The image of a God without judgment. Yes, that's right. A God who doesn't punish, doesn't condemn, doesn't destroy, but who guides, who welcomes, who awakens. And this idea, so simple in essence, was hidden for centuries, or rather replaced by fear-based theology. Let's be honest for a moment. How many times during your life have you heard that God was watching over your sins? How many times have you been afraid to make mistakes, not for the sake of good, but for the avoidance of divine punishment? How many times have you gone to church seeking comfort, only to leave with a heavier heart, feeling dirty, unworthy, guilty of even existing? Now look inside. What if I told you this fear didn't come from God, but from men? That this punitive, judgmental, angry figure ready to unleash his fury on sinners isn't the true God, but a religious construct used to control, domesticate, to keep people trapped in a faith that doesn't liberate but enslaves? In the hidden Gospels, those who are already beginning to understand that they were deliberately silenced, there is no mention of eternal hell. There is no portrait of an angry God sitting on a throne judging the living and the dead with a sword in his hand. What is a God who invites, who teaches, who offers ways of vigilance? A God who reveals himself through conscience and does not condemn it. A God who calls us children, not accused. This is a profound change, because if God doesn't judge, then we no longer need to live under the weight of guilt. We no longer need to fear divine punishment for every thought, every mistake, every moment of doubt. The focus is no longer the fear of punishment, but rather the call to awakening, inner transformation, self-knowledge, true spiritual responsibility, born not of threat but of awareness. Can you imagine the impact of this? For centuries, faith has been built on a central idea: be obedient or suffer forever. This phrase, even if never spoken, lies behind so many sermons, doctrines, and dogmas. It lurks between the lines of many prayers, many songs, and many confessions, and the result is an infantilized and frightened spirituality, filled with rituals that serve more to appease the fear of punishment than to nurture a real connection with the divine. But when we read forgotten texts, such as the Gospel of Thomas, Mary, and Philip, we find no hell as eternal punishment. There is no threat of a fire that will never be erased, nor the image of a demon as a rival entity to God. What appears to be a path of enlightenment, a return to the light, a restoration of essence. Judgment, when mentioned, is more a metaphor for awakened consciousness than a cosmic courtroom scene. And that changes everything, because without the fear of hell, you begin to seek God out of love, not fear. You begin to grow spiritually, not to avoid punishment, but to reveal who you truly are. The fear of theology gives way to the spirituality of truth, to free faith, to an authentic encounter with the sacred. Now think about me. Who else would be interested in maintaining the idea of a vengeful, jealous, and righteous justice? Who benefits from a crowd of people for fear of making mistakes, fear of thinking differently, fear of exploring other forms of spirituality? The answer is uncomfortable but necessary. Religious systems that grew up with guilt and submission. A God who loves cannot be the same one who punishes forever. A God who is light cannot use darkness as a threat. A God who created us freely will not condemn us to use him to search, to doubt, to learn. That's why these truths were hidden. For a God who guides and doesn't punish, he takes power from the intermediaries. He takes away the monopoly on salvation. He takes fear into the equation, and when fear disappears, control is over. This theology of fear was so well constructed that many still find it dangerous to say it. But then people will do whatever they want. I said some. But the truth is exactly the opposite. The more one connects with the God of consciousness, of light, of inner truth, the more this person acts with compassion, with love, with integrity. Not out of fear, but out of awakening. Fear paralyzes. Consciousness is liberated. The silence of fear. The truth gives voice. Fear plugs in. Spirituality liberates. And now that you're beginning to feel the impact of knowing that God isn't looking at you to punish you, but to call you to wake up, what do you do with it? How does this change the way you pray, the way you live, the way you look at others? Perhaps that's why, even in silence, your soul has always resisted the image of a cruel God. Perhaps that's why, even following the rules, you never felt completely at peace. Because somewhere inside you knew there was a mistake there. And now you're seeing this mistake refuted before your eyes, not because you say it, but because the truth has this effect. It doesn't have to impose itself, it's just felt. And at this moment, you may be thinking about everything you've heard about hell, about divine wrath, about the final judgment. You may be revisiting scenes, memories, fears that were planted within you from childhood. I understand. It's difficult to deconstruct all this, but it's also liberating, because true faith doesn't need fear to sustain itself. It sustains itself in experience, in the inner light, in peace that surpasses all understanding. Now I want to hear you. Have you ever felt like a prisoner of faith based on fear? Have you been guilty about things that you realize don't make sense today? Have you already suspected that hell, as you were taught, may never have existed? Comment here. I choose awareness, not fear. Or if you prefer something more direct, write, "The God I seek does not condemn, he guides." These phrases aren't just words, they're spiritual declarations. They resonate in the collective realm and help rescue what was forgotten. And the next step in this journey will show how hidden truths, though uncomfortable and not just liberating, reveal a spiritual plane far deeper than we imagine. So breathe, because the next revelation will challenge you even further. If, as we have seen so far, the Apocryphal Gospels have been hidden, if the indwelling God has been replaced by a distant being and judge, if the sacred feminine has been silenced, and Judas has been painted as a traitor to preserve a convenient narrative, then the question that must be courageously asked is, who is it? Who is the prophet of all this? This is one of the most important questions on this entire journey, and also one of the most avoided in churches and religious institutions. Because when you begin to investigate those who benefit from the manipulation of faith, you enter delicate territory, where spirituality has been hijacked by interests that have nothing to do with the divine, where the name of God has been used as a power tool. For centuries, fear was the most valuable currency in the hands of institutionalized religions. The fear of hell, the fear of sinning, the fear of being excluded, the fear of questions, the fear of thinking differently. And this fear was carefully planted, cultivated and watered to produce a very specific type of follower. Submissive, obedient, malleable. A type of faith that doesn't transform the world, it only keeps the structures working as they are. But why would anyone maintain this kind of control? Why nurture this kind of spirituality based on fear rather than love? The answer lies in power. Power over minds, power over bodies, power over decisions. Spiritual rule, when corrupted, becomes the most effective form of social control, because when you control someone's faith, you control their heart. And whoever controls the heart controls everything. Religions, in their original essence, arose to connect human beings with the divine. But many religious institutions over time have ceased to be bridges and have become barriers. They have become businesses. They have become systems. They have become authorities that have decided what is right and wrong, what is holy and unholy, what is worthy of salvation and what deserves to be condemned. And this is where the codes of manipulation come into play. subtle but deeply rooted codes. Languages carefully structured to keep the faithful dependent, keeping the flock together around a shepherd who, more often than not, doesn't want to liberate, but rather maintain control. Because a people who think, who question, who seek the God within, cannot be controlled. Have you noticed how everything has been designed to convince you that you can't access the divine alone? That you need a leader, a temple, a liturgy, a specific ritual? Have you noticed how your spirituality has been shaped to keep you forever tied to something, always trying to please a God who never seems satisfied? Now think about the impact of this. A guilty people is a manipulable people. A people who fear eternal punishment is a people who doesn't rebel. A people who believe that questioning is sin doesn't seek answers. And that's exactly how a spiritual empire is built. Not really, but fear. Not with freedom, but with dependence. Often, behind the cross, there is a throne. Behind the Bible, a code of power. Behind the liturgy, a strategy of domination. And this isn't an indictment of all religious leaders. There are sincere and honest people who truly believe what they preach. But the structure, the system, the team, this was built to keep the dough sleeping. And that's why the hidden gospels were set aside, because in them there is no room for control. Jesus doesn't appear as a moral legislator, but as an awakener. He doesn't demand blind obedience, but invites self-sufficiency. He doesn't point his finger, but looks you in the eye. He doesn't offer fear, but truth. A truth that transforms, that empowers, that causes human beings to rise up and say, I am the Son of Light. I am a living temple of the Spirit. I don't need to be dominated to be divine. This is the truth that frightens the systems. Because it brings you back to yourself, it makes you free. It breaks the invisible contracts you signed in fear. And once you wake up, you never return to the old prison. That's why the question, who benefits from the lie, must be asked. Because when you begin to see, you begin to free yourself. And when it breaks, it begins to free others. And that's where the energy codes begin to crumble. Because what underpins these structures isn't true faith, it's collective fear. And the more this fear crumbles, the more the true kingdom begins to emerge. Maybe now you understand why you were so discouraged from reading on your own, studying through other means, questioning certain doctrines. Because there's an invisible line that separates what is permitted from what is forbidden within the faith. A line that hasn't been drawn by God, but by men who don't want to lose the power they've built. And when you cross this line, when you decide to listen to the forgotten texts, when you begin to reconnect with your intuition, your inner light, the system begins to shake, because you are no longer a flock, and it becomes light. It becomes a priest of itself. It becomes a living temple, and one that no one can control. And now I want to ask you sincerely, have you ever felt like your faith was used as a tool of control? Have you noticed how certain religious discourses are structured to generate fear, guilt, and obedience? Have you already suspected that there is something much bigger behind everything you were told was the absolute truth? Right here in the comments, I break the codes of fear. Or feeling in my heart say, I will no longer be manipulated in the name of God. Their comments aren't just interactions, they're spiritual declarations, and each one helps build this new space of consciousness where spirituality is free, profound, and truth is centered within you. Let's continue together, because what's coming will play out in a way you've never had the courage to look at. But now, you're ready. After everything we've revealed so far, the hidden gospels, the God within, the sacred, silenced feminine, the spiritual mission of Judas, the absence of hell, religious manipulation, the inevitable question that arises is, what now? What does this change in my spiritual life? How does all this apply to the way I relate to the divine, to myself, and to the world around me? The truth is, it changes everything. It changes the foundation. It changes the way you breathe spirituality, how you see God's presence in every detail of your existence. Because when you stop seeing the Creator as a distant judge and begin to recognize Him as a living presence within you, the way you live changes forever. This new form of connection with the divine is not mediated by temples. It is not dependent on hierarchies, nor is it limited to stifled dogmas. It is free. It is intimate, it is silent, and at the same time, deeply transformative. It happens in your dark room, in your most sincere doubt, in your silent tear. It happens when you choose to listen to the inner voice instead of the cry of fear. You no longer need to carry the burden of imposed guilt. You no longer need to negotiate your salvation with sacrifices that weaken you. You no longer need to feel less than in front of spiritual leaders who claim to own the truth. True spirituality doesn't put you down. It reminds you of who you are. And who are you? You are a living temple. You are a channel of divine light. You are the consciousness in the process of awakening. You are part of the whole. You are a child of Source. Without sin, without shame or condemnation. You were taught to see yourself as small, sinful, unworthy. But your soul always knew, this is not all you are. When you understand that faith is not an emotional prison, but a path of expanding consciousness, everything within you begins to dawn. Your prayers change. The way you see others changes. You stop judging, you stop competing, you stop fearing. And you begin to love, you begin to forgive truly. You begin to look within without shame, without masks, without guilt. This spirituality that is being born in you now doesn't need an audience, it doesn't seek applause, it doesn't require a spectacle, because it is real. And what is real doesn't need to prove anything. It just exists. And then suddenly you understand. The Bible isn't an end in itself, it's a beginning. But the hidden Gospels you never had access to are the missing chapters for your soul to understand the whole story. You feel the call to stop living out of fear and start living out of conscience. For truth, for inner freedom. And make no mistake, this is not an easy walk. Conscience hurts. Light reveals shadows. And often, walking towards spiritual truth is walking against everything you've learned as correct. But it's also the only journey worth taking, because to live in fear is to survive. To live in consciousness is to exist. It breathes like an awakened soul. It is coming home within yourself. You may be feeling this now, this silent presence that doesn't judge you, that doesn't demand of you, but invites you. It doesn't shout, but whispers. It doesn't claim perfection, but calls for awakening. This presence is the divine, and it is within you, it always has been. But why have you never told yourself this? Why have you hidden this aspect of the faith that sets you free? Because a free soul is frightening. You can't control a soul that thinks for itself, that connects with the sacred without human mediation. And as we've seen, spiritual manipulation requires fear to survive. Without fear, religion becomes love. Without guilt, faith realizes. Without submission, the system collapses. Therefore, true spirituality, the kind that is emerging now, must be chosen with courage. It won't be applauded by everyone. It won't be understood by those who still live in the bars of institutionalized religion, but it will be felt. And once you feel it, you'll never want to go back. Imagine what your life would be like if every step you took were guided by this certainty. I am a temple of the divine. Imagine waking up and not feeling guilty for existing, but grateful for being. Imagine not living in love, but living as an expression of love itself. Imagine praying not to ask for approval, but to reconnect with your essence. This is what changes when you choose to let go of fear and embrace spiritual awareness. You no longer need to be convinced that God loves you. You begin to feel this love as part of who you are. It's not a theory, it's an experience. It's not a belief, it's an experience. And here I want to ask you a direct and forceful question. Is your soul ready for this truth, not just to hear it, but to live it, to stop hiding behind mechanical prayers and finally direct itself as an awakened being? This is your decision. No video, no text, no teacher can do it for you. But if you've gotten here, it's because something inside you is already moving. It's already awakening. And that, my friend, there's no going back. Now tell me, do you feel like something inside you has changed throughout this video? Can you realize how much lighter, and more alive spirituality there is? Do you feel you are ready, or at least ready, to live a faith without fear? Write here in the comments, my soul is ready. Or if you want to declare your awakening, comment, I choose awareness and not fear. These comments are more than words. They are seeds of a new spirituality that is emerging. Seeds that, planted in the hearts of everyone who watches this video, will blossom into freedom, light, and truth. and the next revelation we'll bring you will tie together everything you've learned so far and show you that God's biggest lie may have been keeping you from looking inside and discovering that He's always been there. If you got here from the heart, congratulations. You're part of a very rare group, people who aren't afraid of the truth, who face doubts, who dive deep into their souls and choose to look beyond the veil of religion. And now I want to make one last request of you, which seems small, but has a gigantic impact. Subscribe to the channel now. Just click this red button below so you don't miss the next videos and continue this journey with me, apocalypse by apocalypse, truth by truth. And leave your like if this video made sense to you. This helps YouTube understand that this content needs to reach more people. People who, like you, are waking up. Your like is like a light seed sown into the digital field, and if you stayed until the end, comment below, "I choose to live in conscience." This phrase will show that you are part of this new movement of awakened souls, and it will also help me identify who is truly committed to this transformation. And now, don't stop there. The following video is already appearing on your screen. Click on it right now because the sequence of this journey will show you what you've hidden the most and why your faith must be rebuilt based on the truth. See you there. And never forget, the truth is set free, but only to those who have the courage to speak out. Thank you for watching this video until the end. We will see you in the next video.